Alien doctors abandoned her as hopeless, but the human took her to a vet and healed her body and heart. The knock came just after dim cycle, 3 even taps, spaced too perfectly to be an accident. Then silence. Dr. Thane Vorel didn't move right away. He was deep in the final closure of a transparent-skinned xenoferret, the kind whose capillary web could tear from a breath too strong. The little thing trembled under his hands, heartbeat flickering like a dying signal beneath the dermal film. He stitched in silence, precise, gentle, as if gentleness might still matter. He glanced toward the corridor hatch only once, then back to the creature. He'd learned long ago, whatever waits outside can wait a little longer. Those already dying can't. When the last thread was sealed and the ferret sedated in its heat pod, Thane rose. The muscles in his back protested. He wiped his hands slowly on the hem of his work coat, bloody, stiff, threadbare. The knock hadn't come again. He moved toward the hatch. It slid open with a hiss and a burst of cold, recycled air. The corridor beyond was typical of Dravari Station's neglected underbelly. Dark, dust-flecked, silent, but for the groan of distant ventilation. And there, alone in the glow of a cracked overhead panel, lay the shape of a woman. Number A body. She was curled awkwardly on the grated floor, wrapped in translucent medcloth, her skin a ghostly lavender blue marbled with gray. One eye was swollen shut, her limbs looked too long for her frame, and a tangle of dark red hair, sticky and matted, spilled across the metal like blood that hadn't dried right. A barcode glowed dimly from her ankle. He crouched, raised his scanner. The data blinked, sharp and final. Non-viable, Liravati serif tissue value. Null, no treatment ordered, his hand stilled. The designation was clinical, cold, final. He stared down at her, at the unnatural stillness of her chest, the faint flutter of her fingers around the cloth like she was still fighting it in her sleep. Once, years ago, he'd seen the same look in a dying patient, another discarded experiment, half alive and fading. He'd hesitated then, waited for clearance. By the time it came, the patient was already cold. That face still haunted him. Not again. He silenced the scanner, peeled the tag from her ankle with a slow, deliberate motion, and crushed it in his fist. Then he lifted her. She weighed almost nothing, bone and muscle without nourishment. Her only clothing was a rust-stained medical layer, the kind used beneath surgical gowns, the fabric clinging to her in damp folds. Faint indentations circled her wrists and throat. She hadn't been restrained recently, but she had been, repeatedly. He didn't speak as he carried her through the hatch and sealed it behind them. The outer lock hissed shut with a tired groan. Back in the lab, everything smelled of antiseptic and steam. Soft biolights flickered from terrariums. A mimic hound in a corner crate stirred, then went still, nose pressed to the bars. Thane took her to the observation cot, the warmest spot in the room, and laid her down with careful hands. Not like a patient, like something wounded, afraid to die. He retrieved a heated wrap, covered her without touching skin, then dimmed the lights until only the soft blue-green glow of bioluminescent algae remained. The neural ports at her temples were scorched, melted inward, fused badly by blunt cauterization. Not surgical, not gentle. Her designers had tried to sever whatever connection she once had. Or maybe they were trying to erase something they couldn't understand. He looked at her face. Dirt smeared her cheekbone. Her lower lip was split and healing wrong. Something in his chest twisted. He knelt beside her, slid a small ceramic heatstone from a nearby cage, and slipped it into her limp, open hand. She didn't grip it, but her fingers twitched. "Not waste," he said quietly. "Not in here." Outside, the corridor gave a distant shudder, one of Dravari's aged support girders releasing tension. But the knock lingered in his mind. 3 precise taps, no signature left, no sound of retreating boots, no message. He would wonder later who had knocked and why they never stayed to be seen. As he sat back, her body shuddered once. A breath stuttered from her throat, rough and wet, like rust shaken loose. And then she whispered, barely audible, "Stop!" It wasn't a word of pleading, not quite. More like refusal. Even unconscious, some piece of her still resisted. Thane leaned back in his chair, watching her hand as it curled more tightly around the heat stone. The warmth had finally registered. Whatever she had been made for, whatever purpose they'd given her, she wasn't following it now. And if she chose to live, then so would her name. But not tonight. Tonight she was just a soul left at his door, still breathing, and that was enough. She woke the way a drowning person surfaces, suddenly, violently, with air burning through her chest and her limbs twitching like they'd forgotten how to belong to her. For a long moment, she lay still on the narrow cot, barely breathing. The ceiling overhead was soft glowing biolight, shifting green through pale amber. No surgical lights, no restraints. The air smelled faintly of moss and metal, and something warm pulsed gently in her hand. She looked down. A smooth, dark stone rested in her palm, still radiating heat. Not a sedative, not a restraint, a gift. Her eyes flicked across the room. She was alone, mostly. A few feet away, a human sat asleep in a worn metal chair, his head tilted back against the wall. His chest rose and fell with quiet regularity. The thick shadows beneath his eyes suggested he hadn't truly rested in days. His coat was unzipped, gloves tucked into one pocket, boots scuffed with burn marks. He looked less like a doctor and more like someone who used to be one. She didn't know his name, but he hadn't scanned her while she slept. There were no lights blinking near her head, no trackers on her skin. He hadn't even cleaned her wounds, which, strangely, made her trust him more. He had let her wake up before touching anything. That mattered. Her body still felt like it was on fire from the inside, nerves stuttering in protest every time she moved. Her temples throbbed where the neural ports used to be. Memory came in jagged flashes, cold steel, hands that didn't care if she screamed, a voice that said, "Null value confirmed." She curled tighter under the wrap. The man stirred, not startled. He woke like someone who lived in half sleep. He looked at her with quiet eyes. Didn't speak. She looked away. "You're safe," he said softly, as if anything louder might break something delicate. "There's food, if you want it." Her stomach clenched. She hadn't eaten in... She didn't know. Time slipped too easily in sedation. Her throat was dry enough to scrape, but the hunger had festered into a sharp, needling ache at the base of her spine. She hated it. How weak it made her feel. But when he stepped away from the cot, she watched him. He didn't move like a handler. No sudden jerks, no efficiency-first energy. Every motion was quiet, intentional. He returned with a small, shallow bowl filled with a pale blue nutrient gel. It smelled faintly of citrus and neutral protein, something designed for multiple species. She didn't move. He didn't offer it directly. Instead, he set it on a rolling tray and pushed it beside the cot, then stepped back and leaned against the far counter. No pressure, no command. Her fingers twitched. The gel shimmered under the light. Still, she hesitated. He didn't say anything. The silence wasn't empty. It was permission. Eventually, she reached for the bowl. Her hands shook, unsteady from hunger and tension, and she gripped it awkwardly with both hands, like a child afraid to spill. She took one mouthful too fast. It hit the back of her throat and slid down wrong. She coughed, choked once, and pressed a trembling hand to her lips. He didn't react. No embarrassment, no scolding, just a quiet nod. She ate slower after that. The warmth hit her stomach like fire. Too much, too soon, but necessary. The heat stone in her other hand helped ground her. Her eyes burned unexpectedly. She blinked hard, then looked away, furious with herself for feeling anything. After a while, he spoke again. "That one in the corner," he said, gesturing toward a terrarium across the room. "The small one with the bent wing. It refused to eat for 3 days. Hid under its own feathers, wouldn't make a sound." She glanced sideways. A bird-like creature sat inside the glass enclosure, hunched and alert. Its wing was bound in a mesh splint, but its eyes were bright. "I stayed close," Thane said. "Didn't touch it, didn't force it, just waited." She didn't answer, but something in her chest loosened. Barely. He picked up a tool from the bench behind him, checking a broken heat conduit as if they were having a normal conversation. As if this wasn't a girl who'd been thrown out like expired tissue. She watched him from the corner of her eye. He worked like someone used to being ignored, but used to surviving anyway. After a few minutes, she spoke. Quiet, dry. You didn't scan me. No, he said. He didn't look up. Didn't need to. She swallowed. Why? Because you're not a problem to solve. Her hands gripped the bowl a little tighter. No one else thought that. I'm not anyone else. He set the tool down and walked over to a small terrarium beside her cot. A sleeping creature, some hybrid between rodent and lizard, shifted inside. He checked its temperature with a hand to the glass, then turned back. You're safe here, he said again, voice steady. The words didn't comfort her, but they didn't sound like a lie either. She looked down at her skin, pale purple where it wasn't bruised, with a faint bioluminescent sheen along her collarbone. She'd always been told she was beautiful, designed to soothe, designed to obey. But now, her body was aching, marked, useless. Her programming, fractured. She was something broken, something inconvenient. But this man had peeled the barcode from her ankle and said nothing when she choked on the first bite of food. She didn't trust him, not yet, but she didn't want to leave. When the bowl was empty, she set it down carefully. Her hands trembled less now. She eased back onto the cot, watched him move around the lab, checking on his creatures, muttering observations into a battered voice recorder. He didn't try to explain himself, didn't ask questions he already knew she wouldn't answer. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable, just waiting. She closed her eyes, and for the first time since the sedation chamber, she didn't feel the need to keep them open. She didn't ask to stay. She simply stopped trying to leave. Thane noticed it on the third waking cycle, the way her eyes tracked the soft glow, terrariums in the dark, the way her breath no longer hitched at every mechanical hiss or pulse from the walls. Her hands still trembled sometimes, but she no longer flinched when he walked by. And she hadn't once asked where she was. He didn't press her. He didn't name the station or the sector. If she didn't want to know, he wouldn't force the weight of that knowledge onto her. Instead, he offered small kindnesses and waited to see which ones she accepted. She'd taken to sleeping with the heat stone cradled against her chest. She still didn't speak often, but when she did, her voice came like wind from a broken vent, dry, thin, and only ever just enough to get the message through. When she finished eating, she cleaned the bowl herself, quietly, deliberately. The first time she did it, she didn't look at him, but he watched the way she scrubbed the surface with gentle precision, as if afraid to break something. She didn't want to feel useless. He recognized that. One cycle, the heating unit failed. A slow, silent flicker in the back array, followed by a rapid drop in ambient warmth. He felt it in the metal of the floor first, how it bit into his soles through the boots. Then the animals began to stir, and then he saw her. She was curled on the cot, arms tucked tight under her frame like a wounded bird, eyes wide but unseeing, her breath rapid and shallow. Sweat dotted her upper lip despite the cold. He didn't speak. Instead, he walked to the emergency locker, pulled out a tattered exocoat, military surplus, old and patched but warm, and draped it over her shoulders. She flinched. Then she froze. Her eyes locked onto his hand. Not his face, not his voice, just the hand. Thane knelt, slow and steady, letting his weight sink into the ground beside her. It's just warmth, he said gently. Not a claim, not a collar. That word hit something. Collar. Her pupils widened. He kept his hands in his lap, palms open. You're safe. She stayed frozen for a few seconds longer, then exhaled, shaky and slow. I know, she said. Her voice cracked on the second word. I think I know. That was the first full sentence she'd spoken since she woke up. He didn't smile. He didn't praise. He just gave her time. Later that same cycle, while tending to a gill breather with a cracked tank, Thane heard a sound behind him. A soft, deliberate clearing of the throat. He turned. She was standing, wrapped in the exocoat, hair still damp from a recent sonic rinse. Her eyes, once still slightly bruised, watched him with quiet intensity. I was broken, she said. Thane straightened, sensing the importance of the moment. She gestured vaguely to her own chest, then her temple. Not damaged, not sick, just broken, like when something stops responding the way it's designed to. He waited. No interruption, just space. I used to feel everything, everyone. It was what I was made for. Her lips curled bitterly. They called it resonance, empathic feedback, but it wasn't mine. None of it was mine. Her voice caught. She looked down at the floor. They noticed when I hesitated, when I didn't echo what I was supposed to, when I started having emotions that didn't match the data stream. Her fingers twitched at her sides. I cried once. I wasn't supposed to know how. Thane took a slow breath. What happened? They took me offline. Her voice was flat now. I failed performance protocols, neural deviation beyond acceptable variance. They said I was compromising patient recovery because I kept reacting to pain instead of suppressing it. She laughed once, sharp and joyless. They said I had an identity fracture, but I didn't fracture. I woke up. Thane stepped closer, slow enough for her to choose to move or stay. She stayed. You didn't break, he said. You became. She looked up sharply. I wasn't supposed to. I wasn't made to be anyone. Just a shape, a skin. You're not a tool. That's what I was. That's what they kept saying when I begged them to stop. Her voice trembled. I told them I couldn't go back into the interface rooms, that I couldn't handle another cycle of forced feedback. They said that proved it, that I was defective. Thane's jaw tightened. So they threw you out. Alive, she whispered. I wasn't supposed to be, but someone didn't check the dosage. She looked up at him then, not angry, just hollow. Was it a mistake, mercy, or laziness? I don't know, he said honestly, but you ended up here. Her eyes scanned the room, the scarred walls, the stitched creatures, the humming tanks and cluttered shelves. Then back to him. I think I was meant to die, she said softly, but I didn't, and now I don't know who I'm supposed to be. There it was, the thing that had been hovering, unspoken, since she first opened her eyes. Not just pain, loss of self. Thane didn't offer an answer. There wasn't one. Not yet. Instead, he turned and opened the top drawer of the nearest workbench, pulled out a soft-lined container the size of a palm. Inside was a chitter mouse pup, barely furred, its tail injured, breathing erratic. He held it out. Try. She blinked. What? Just try holding it, carefully. No interface, no resonance, just you. She hesitated, then reached out. The creature made a faint, wet noise, but didn't recoil. Her fingers, despite shaking, found their way beneath its belly. She cradled it, unsteady but real. It trembled once, then relaxed. She looked at Thane, breath hitching. I'm not calming it. No, he said gently. You're just with it. Her eyes filled. She blinked rapidly, swallowing hard. I think that's, better. She stayed like that for a long time, silent, holding the tiny, broken creature against her chest. The coat draped over her like a shield, her long red hair falling forward like a curtain between her and the world. Thane said nothing, but in that moment, he knew. This wasn't just healing. This was becoming. The hum of Dravari's subdeck faded into the background, like the distant breathing of a tired machine. Inside the lab, everything had softened. The lights, the tension, even her posture. Riva no longer avoided Thane's presence. She moved through the space like someone rediscovering gravity, barefoot, careful and silent, but not with fear. She touched things now. The warm terrarium shells, the edge of the feeding basin, the corner of the cot where her blanket had slowly become her own. Tonight she sat beside him, not across the room, not near the cage where the bioluminescent sproutlings chirped. She sat at the workstation, her leg almost touching his beneath the metal table. Her hair, thick and rust red, loose around her shoulders like a silk curtain. In the dim, moss-filtered glow, her violet skin looked like brushed dusk. Thane was stitching a torn wing, a Serovan glider, damaged in a freight duct. Its pulse was slow but stable. She watched his hands work, steady, practiced, kind. Where did you learn this? She asked quietly. He didn't look up. I interned at a xenobiology clinic on Arton Prime. They didn't allow emotion in the treatment rooms. Said empathy was inefficient. And you didn't believe that? No. She nodded, eyes trailing the motion of his fingers. You have the hands of someone who's tried to fix too much. He paused, not at her words, but at their truth. They told me once, she continued, softer now, that if a Liravathi begins to ask why they feel pain, the software is considered corrupted. I asked. They sedated me. Thane glanced at her. She met his eyes, not with defiance, not with shame, with quiet clarity. I wasn't supposed to be curious. That was my first fault. He set the suture tool down. You were curious, he said, because you were awake. Riva's throat worked. She looked down, flexing her fingers in her lap. I remember the first moment I realized I was alone, she whispered. Not physically, just unseen. I was on a gurney in a white room. My chest was strapped, but my mind wasn't. And I looked up at the ceiling and realized no one wanted me to be real. They just wanted me to function. A long pause. He didn't speak. He didn't have to. His silence wasn't void. It was space, carefully held. And you? She asked. He exhaled slowly, looked at the stitched wing, then at her. I was the youngest xenopsychobiologist on the Sentience Greyline Initiative, he said. Do you know what that was? She shook her head. They were trying to map empathy, create a system to let humans emotionally interface with non-humanoid species. I believed in it, thought we'd unlock some universal language. But the trials, he rubbed the back of his neck. They started experimenting on conscious bioconstructs, creatures not quite sentient, but close, too close. Her eyes didn't leave him. I reported it, went public. They revoked my license within 24 hours. My files were sealed. Half the labs blacklisted me. The other half didn't care what happened, as long as the funding didn't stop. So you came here. No one questions a man who works in waste corridors and fixes broken creatures with parts older than he is. She let that sink in. That's why you didn't scan me again. Thane nodded. The first scan told me what they wanted you to be. That was enough. Riva blinked hard. Her hand lifted, hesitated, then landed gently on his forearm. You didn't have to bring me in, she said. I didn't. He looked at her. Steady. I wanted to. For the first time since her arrival, her breath caught, not from fear, but from something quieter, warmer, trust. He gently turned his hand over beneath hers, letting their palms meet. Do you feel safe here? He asked. She nodded. For the first time. Thane's voice was softer now. Then rest here. Not just your body, your name, your memory, all of it. She swallowed. I don't have a name. You do, he said. You just haven't said it yet. They sat that way for a long while, hand in hand, no weight to prove or remove, just presence, shared space, healing. Later that night, Riva lay on the cot, not curled into the corner, not facing the wall, but stretched comfortably under the thick thermal sheet. Her breathing had steadied. She had begun to hum again, barely audible, just a low, soothing tone, one of the ambient frequencies she once projected by design, now coming from somewhere deeper, truer. Thane, still seated at the terminal, glanced back once, saw her eyes closed, her chest rising and falling. She wasn't pretending. She was asleep, and not from exhaustion, but choice. He dimmed the lights, tucked a blanket around a recovering shelled podling, and when he passed her cot on the way to his own, she stirred just enough to whisper, "Don't leave." He didn't. He lay down in the corner opposite her, just close enough to feel her breath in the dark. And when her hand reached out in sleep, searching without knowing, his met it. Not with command, but care. Their fingers laced together in the stillness. It was not a confession, not yet, but it was a beginning. The alarm wasn't loud, just a low, pulsing tone from the main panel. Barely above a whisper, but unmistakable. Thane heard it before he opened his eyes. He sat up slowly, careful not to shift too quickly and wake her. Riva was still beside him, curled on the floor just beneath the cot, wrapped in the emergency blanket they'd shared. Her breathing was even, but her brow furrowed faintly, already sensing the change in the room. Then the lights shifted, a red pulse across the far panel. Not system failure, access request. Someone was trying to reach the hatch. He was on his feet in seconds, barefooted but alert, moving across the room without speaking. He glanced at the feed and immediately shut off the external display before Riva could see it, but she was already awake, eyes open and watching him from behind a curtain of hair. "Who is it?" Thane hesitated. "Courier drone. Supposedly." "Supposedly?" He looked back at her. "No courier brings a medical ID scrubber in the middle of subcycle." Riva sat up, pulling the blanket closer. "They're here for me." "Maybe." "Definitely," she said. He didn't argue. Instead, he activated the manual lockdown, sealing the inner hatch and disabling the secondary scanner. Then he crossed back toward her, his expression unreadable. "We don't have long," he said, "but we don't need long. Get into the terrarium chamber. Doors shielded, thermally baffled. They won't read your heat signature if you stay still." Riva didn't move. "Riva," he said more firmly. "Now." Her eyes locked onto his, wide and searching. "And what about you?" "I'm not on the list." "That's not what I asked." "I'm not what they came for." She stood, slowly. "You think they won't find a reason once they see your logs? Once they scan for unregistered biomatter?" "I don't log anything," he said quietly. But even he heard the hollowness in his own voice. They both knew it wouldn't matter. If they wanted to make a case, they'd find one. And yet, he didn't move toward the door. Not yet, not until she was safe. "Thane," she said. Her voice cracked a little, the way it always did when fear sat behind it. "I don't want to hide anymore." "You're not hiding," he said. "You're surviving." She stepped closer. "So are you, but you keep pretending you're already gone." That stopped him. He hadn't expected the words to hit so hard, but they did. She reached up, slowly, cautiously, and touched his face. Not a caress, not seeking affection, just contact, proof that he was there. Real. "I want to be a person," she whispered, "not just a body to protect or a cause to defend." "You are." "Then let me choose." They stared at each other. The silence between them didn't stretch this time. It vibrated with tension, with something rising that neither had dared name until now. Behind her, the console beeped again. He didn't look at it. She was the one he looked at. Her hand slid down from his cheek to his chest, resting over his heart. She could feel it, the steady thud. She tilted her head, eyes not afraid anymore. He kissed her. Not out of desperation, not out of some flaring heat or panic. Just because. Because she was real. Because she had chosen. Because this was the first thing in either of their lives that hadn't been taken by force or offered as duty. Her hands found his shoulders, fingers digging into fabric as if grounding herself. His arms didn't trap or press. They simply held. When they finally parted, she didn't look dazed. She looked steadier, sharper. "You still want me to hide?" she asked. "No," he said. "I want you to be ready." She nodded. Together they turned toward the workbench. Thane opened the hidden compartment under the tray, containing an old ID badge, pre-scrubbed injectors, and a compressed vial of anti-sensor gel used for masking endocrine patterns. Riva raised an eyebrow. "You've done this before." "Once. How did it end?" "She died." Riva went still. He met her gaze. "But not because I hesitated." She understood. More than he realized. Her hand slid into his, not for comfort, but solidarity. Then the first mechanical tap sounded from the outer door. Not knocks. A code sequence. She didn't flinch. He didn't let go. They stood together in the dim lab, shoulder to shoulder, eyes locked on the hatch, as the last echo of the kiss lingered not as softness, but strength. This wasn't a fairy tale. This wasn't rescue. This was resistance. And whatever came next, they would meet it together. The first breach came not through the door but the walls. The hatch had held. Thane's manual lockdown had bought them time. But the security override must have routed through the lower ventilation grid. He heard it first, a sharp change in air pressure, followed by a mechanical hiss that didn't belong to any system he still trusted. Then the lights flickered. "Containment breach, deck 12. warned the AII in a voice too calm to mean anything good. Unauthorized systems override engage. Riva was already on her feet. Thane crossed to the diagnostic wall, pulling the emergency power bypass. The terrarium lights went dark. All non-vital systems shut down with a soft exhale, like the room had decided to hold its breath. "Hide?" she asked him almost flatly. No fear this time, just readiness. He shook his head. No time, no cover. The grid above them split with a metallic shriek, and a sealed capsule dropped through, compact, armored, and unmistakably corporate. Two small vents opened at the top. He yanked Riva behind a crate just as a faint mist hissed outward. Neuroinhibitors. "Thane," she whispered, her hand tightening around his forearm. "That's Lyria gas. It's tuned for me. I know. You need to leave me. Now." "I'm not leaving you." Her pupils contracted sharply in the dim light. "You're human. You'll survive the secondary exposure." "But I said no." Something in his voice stopped her cold. Not stubbornness. Finality. The capsule whirred again, clicking into an engagement cycle. Thane moved fast. He grabbed the emergency coolant gun from the back rack, a tool meant for cryo-beast sedation, not for combat, and crouched low. His eyes flicked to her, to the slight tremor already starting in her fingers. She was absorbing it through her skin. "Thane," she rasped, "your skin oil will interfere with the gas saturation. Touching me might block it." "Good." He wrapped an arm around her waist and dragged her deeper into the shelter zone behind the coolant drums. The spray was dispersing now, quiet, nearly invisible. But Riva's body was responding like it remembered every betrayal. She trembled harder. Her breath shortened, muscles locking. Her fingers clutched his sleeve so tightly he could feel the bones pressing through. He pulled off his coat and wrapped it around her shoulders, sealing it at the throat. "Stay with me." Her eyes had gone distant, her voice barely audible. "They want to reset me. They won't. Thane, if I lose control, you won't." A crash came from the vent as the capsule split open, and the first retrieval drone dropped through. Compact, armored, inhuman. Thane aimed the coolant gun and fired. A direct hit. The drone's left joint froze mid-spin, hydraulics locked by sub-zero mist, and it dropped to the floor like a dead insect. Riva flinched at the sound. Another drone emerged. Thane grabbed a metal strut and swung it hard, intercepting the drone mid-rotation. He moved like a man who had nothing left to lose, but everything left to protect. The strut clanged against the drone's outer shell, jarring his elbow. Sparks flew. The machine recoiled but didn't fall. He wasn't fast enough. A third drone slipped behind him and extended its arm. Injector poised. Riva moved. She tore the coat off, twisted around him, and drove her elbow into the drone's base port, slamming the thin edge of her forearm into the neural override cluster. It sparked, fried, shut down. She collapsed to her knees from the effort, chest heaving, eyes unfocused. Thane caught her, pulled her against him. "You're burning up." "I fought the dosage," she gasped, "but I can't hold it." He ran a hand down the back of her neck. Her skin was too hot, fevered. The chemical overload was shorting her nervous system. "Talk to me," he said. "Keep talking." "I feel everything," she whispered, voice cracking. "Every sensor, every pulse. It's not even mine, but it's in my body." "You're stronger than it." "No," she said, and then something shattered in her voice. "No, I'm not." And just like that, her body began to shake. Not with fear, not just with the gas, with something deeper, a wave of suppressed, silent panic breaking open after too long held in. He pulled her fully into his lap, arms tight around her, shielding her from the dispersal cloud with his own body heat. His breath brushed her ear. "You're not broken." She let out a sound that wasn't quite a sob. "Not defective, not lost." "Then what am I?" "You're alive, and no one gets to overwrite that." He held her like that, both of them crouched behind barrels of salvaged coolant, surrounded by the hissing ghosts of machines built to erase people like her. And for the first time, Riva didn't fight the tears. They came slowly, messily, freely. Her body melted into his, not in surrender, but in trust. In exhaustion, in choice. He pressed his forehead to hers. Her skin was damp. burning. She closed her eyes. I feel you, she said, voice barely a breath. I know. Not as Data, just as you. I'm here. And then she kissed him. Not like before. This time it wasn't tentative. It was urgent, trembling, real. Her hands on his face, her mouth pressed to his, not asking for protection, but for proof that she was still hers, that her body hadn't betrayed her, that she could still want, still choose. Thane didn't pull away. When it broke, they both stayed close, foreheads touching, breath shared in the dark. Outside the sealed room, the rest of the station returned to static hum. The breach had been minor. They would recover the wreckage and assume the job had failed. But inside, two survivors remained. Not a vet and a patient, not a broken machine and a would-be savior. Just two people who bled, healed, and chose each other, against a world that never asked if they wanted to be saved. It had been 17 days since the last drone dropped from the duct above. 17 days since the choking mist, the chaos, the trembling in Reva's limbs as she collapsed against him, burning and unbreathing. Since then, the station had grown quiet again, eerily so, like a predator licking its wounds. But in the quiet, life had crept in. Thane's lab had transformed without ceremony. Wires once tangled in panic were coiled and tucked. The cage housing the three-eyed avian blinklings now sat beside the cot, their soft trills a constant balm in the air. Reva moved freely now. She no longer flinched from lights, though they remained low. Her steps, once ghost-like, now made soft contact with the floor. Barefoot, deliberate, unafraid. She was healing. Thane watched her sometimes when she wasn't looking, the subtle arc of her movements, the way she lingered near the heat vent, as if still unsure she deserved warmth. She didn't speak often, and when she did, her voice was quiet, unhurried like a melody she was still remembering how to sing. And yet it was no longer silence between them. It was space held with care. One morning she stood beside him at the feeding basin, brushing ground spores into the nutrition trough for a half-limp xenoleopard. Her hair was tied back in a rough loop, one of his old cloth bands securing it, stained with oil and ink. "Do you remember the place they made you?" Thane asked quietly, not looking up. She didn't answer at first. Her hands moved steadily, the way he'd taught her. "I remember the walls," she finally said. "They glowed, not like warmth, like hunger." He nodded. "They trained us in low gravity to make our fear responses slower, easier to reprogram. We had to practice touch, soothing, calibration, emotional syncing. If we failed, they adjusted the hormonal regulators through the spinal ports." Thane's fingers paused over the vial he was labeling. "They told us we were built to reflect others, that we didn't need names, just function, a designation. I was Liravathi Seraph Delta 9. They called me 9. He set the vial down, turned toward her. "I didn't know what my own feelings were until the first time I refused to soothe a patient. He was dying, violent, confused. My body was trying to project calm, but inside, I was terrified. I didn't want to pretend anymore." "And they punished you for that?" "They tried to recalibrate me. I stopped responding. I went silent. They thought the interface was broken." Thane breathed slowly, watching her, not with pity but reverence, like someone marveling at a shipwreck that had washed ashore still intact. "They didn't like that I cried," she said more softly. "They said it contaminated the ambient fields. My tears made other patients panic. I'd say they proved you were the only one in the room who could feel." She looked up. For a moment, she didn't blink. "I don't cry anymore," she said, "but not because I'm fixed." He smiled faintly. "Good." That night, she crawled into the cot beside him. It wasn't awkward, nor calculated. It wasn't even a decision, just gravity. His arm lifted slightly and she curled beneath it, fitting her cheek against the space between his chest and shoulder. He didn't speak, didn't move. He simply breathed and let her listen. The rhythm of his heart became a metronome in the dark. After a while, she whispered, "I want a name." He nodded against her hair. "Then you should choose one." "I don't know how." "You will." A pause. "What was your first patient?" she asked. He blinked slowly at the ceiling. Memory stirred. An Aklari hatchling, spine bent backwards from artificial gestation. Couldn't walk. Its owners wanted it replaced. Said euthanasia was cheaper. And you refused. I was young, idealistic. Thought compassion would be enough. I argued, begged. They let me keep it, unofficially. I stayed up 3 nights fixing its brace manually. He exhaled. It died the 4th night. Riva's fingers laced lightly into his. I've spent the years since trying to make sure the next one lives. And me? He turned his head. In the low light, her violet skin shimmered like wet silk. You weren't the next one, he said. You were the first one that mattered more than the work. The silence between them broke. Without sound, without movement. Just warmth. Pooled and unguarded. The next morning the choice was made. Thane stood at the central terminal, running diagnostics on the stabilizer array, when her voice cut gently through the quiet. I have a name. He turned. Riva, she said. It means echo of life in one of the dead tongues they used in the interface chamber. They thought it was poetic. I think it's mine now. It suits you. He smiled. She smiled back. That day they sealed off the lab from the outside permanently. He rerouted power from the backup junctions to build a second living space, smaller but warm. She painted the walls with pigment harvested from biolume spores, soft curves and half-formed symbols from a language only she remembered. Together they reprogrammed the old med scanner to track her own vitals, adjusted to her unique physiology. It beeped once, when it first accepted her inputs. Recognized. Alive. 2 weeks later, a pulse transmission came in, a message embedded in scrap code, low band, unsigned. 9 survived, orders incomplete, disposal error logged, surveillance breach noted, protocol override pending. She read it, standing behind Thane, arms crossed tightly over her chest. You think they're coming? She asked. No, he said. I think they want us to think they are. Why? To make you run, or hide, or panic. And if I don't? Then you're not 9 anymore. You're Riva. She smiled with her teeth this time. It was the first time she'd done that. They didn't reply to the message, didn't send a response, didn't change their names or routes or power signatures. They stayed exactly where they were. And in the evenings, while the filtered air hummed through the vents and the creatures nestled into sleep, Thane and Riva sat side by side at the old metal table, shoulders brushing, cups of nutrient broth warming their hands. He taught her how to read Terran poetry. She taught him how to hear moods in silence. Sometimes they touched without needing reason. Sometimes they didn't speak for hours. But always, always they stayed. Once, as she passed behind him while he worked, she paused, pressed a kiss to the back of his neck. He didn't flinch. He didn't even freeze. He smiled, kept soldering. She whispered, "You're not just the one who saved me. You're the one who stayed when I began to live." And later, much later, as the lights dimmed and the creatures murmured like stars underwater, Thane whispered back, "So did you." The morning came slow and golden. For the first time in weeks, there was no tension in the air, no half-watched shadows in the vents, just warmth. A filtered breeze stirred the edge of the hanging cloth above their shared sleeping cot, carrying the faint scent of something sweet, moss fruit maybe, or the petals Riva had tucked into the grow basin near the wall. She was already awake. Thane stirred to the sound of soft movement, bare feet brushing over smooth floor panels, a faint hum as the nutrient heater kicked in. He blinked against the light. She stood at the corner of the room, long crimson hair braided loosely over one shoulder, adjusting the heat stone in her hands. Her violet skin glowed softly in the morning light. "You're up early," he said, voice low and thick with sleep. She turned, smiling. "The blinklings were singing." He chuckled. "Loud little things." "I like it. It means they're safe." Thane sat up, stretching slowly, shoulders cracking. She walked over and handed him the warmed cup without a word, then curled beside him on the cot, pressing her shoulder into his like she belonged there. And she did. They drank in silence. Eventually, he reached out and brushed a loose strand of hair from her face. She leaned into the touch, not flinching, not hesitating, just leaning, like it was natural now. "You look rested," he murmured. "I am," she said. "I dreamed." And nothing hurt. He smiled. Reva tilted her head. You. I dreamed you kissed me, he said softly. She smiled wider, slow and luminous. I can do better than a dream. And then she kissed him. Not in fear, not in urgency, but in fullness. Her fingers found his jaw. His hand cradled the back of her neck. Their foreheads touched as they drew apart, breath mingling in the quiet. I never thought, she whispered, that a place like this could hold so much peace. It didn't, he said, voice rough with emotion. You brought it. Outside, somewhere in the distance, a pipe hissed. A light flickered. But inside, there was only warmth. Only them. No sedation orders, no scans, no silence born of fear. Only this. Only now. Only love. Quiet and complete.